This episode has been brought to you by JustNForm.com. If you're tired of being censored, tired of having your data stolen and sold, go to JustNForm.com, a social media site where all voices are welcome.
What's going on, everybody? Today I have back with us Terry Bain of Voices, and today we're going to discuss the obvious topic of discussion of seemingly the last 3 years, but more specifically over the last 4 or 5 days, which is the whole press conference with Vladimir Putin, also the reactions to it, and really just what should we make of the Russia hysteria in general. But first, how you doing, Terry?
Pretty good. Nice to be back on camera, although I've got a face made for radio. So I'm really trying to learn another new technology, oh joy, oh rapture. But I appreciate the help. You're a good teacher.
No, I appreciate you coming on and giving us your perspective again. So obviously, I'm sure you've been keeping up with the press conference and you've been keeping up with the reactions, probably more so. That's what I think most people have been keeping up with, because you can't avoid them, right? And my take on the press conference and just the Russiagate thing in general is, I feel like when we have the president meet with an enemy, or at least a perceived enemy of the state, and says, I want to have productive conversation, I want to have peace between the two nations. He even talked about North Korea denuclearizing, and they're following through on that, and saying that he wants to make sure that that partisan politics don't play a part in the international field. I think that that's pretty reasonable. I mean, don't you think?
Yes, and I'm kind of having trouble shifting again. As a baby boomer, I can remember when there really was a Cold War, the real thing. Mm-hmm. I can remember.
But even that,
I can remember when it ended, which was even more difficult of a head shift. And now we're wanting to restart it again. Mm-hmm. Let's not do this, guys. Would be my.
Well, it was funny enough, the only reason that the Cold War was even allowed to ignite back then was because there was this really weird transition within the presidency and the vacuum of power that needed to be filled, or that was filled. So
is that theirs or ours?
Our vacuum
you talking?
Of power. Our vacuum. Remember, FDR passed away.
Okay. Yeah. I was trying to see which cycle we were in.
Yeah, Henry Wallace was cheated. And so because of that, he was FDR's vice president three terms. The fourth term, Truman was literally forced in there by payoffs at the convention. Truman was he was not a good leader. He was not a good president. He was not a good person. He was weak-minded and he was easily controlled. And that's what his presidency was representative of. And so whenever Stalin came up and asked, hey, we're still honoring the agreements about the Eastern Bloc that we created at the Yalta Conference with Winston Churchill and FDR, Truman was like, no, but that's because I wish I could remember the guy's name, but he was actually a Republican that was advising him and was like, no, that never happened. What are you talking about? You're lying to me. You're trying to insult me. And so that was essentially what ignited the Cold War.
Was Dulles Secretary of State then? I think
it was Dulles.
Of the Dulles brothers, one was head of the CIA, one was head of the State Department. Mm-hmm. There's an excellent book on that if people ever want to take a shot at reading it.
Dulles was the one who fabricated the intel on Iran about Mossadegh.
Yep. Yeah, it's a superb history book on those two guys.
That's something
because I think the title's The Brothers.
But I think that's what we're seeing again right now is that vacuum of power that kind of came because Hillary was legitimately challenged by Bernie Sanders in a way that I think he won. But when you kind of cheat the results, you can't predict results accurately. Well, from traditional methods, you can't predict results accurately after that. And so we ended up with Trump as the president. And so yet again, we find ourselves, we have all these resources that we want to bring in, oil, whatever, the resource that we have still in Africa, all these countries simultaneously that Russia are involved in allying in to actually help them fight against, a large part, our imperialism and the rebels that we employ. And so with a combination of they didn't want to lose their military contracts, right? That's a big thing in the intel community.
Military Keynesianism, they've even got a form of economics to back that up.
They do, yeah. And then on top of that, they wanted Hillary Clinton to be the president, right? The media did.
Right.
And the people who paid the foundation so that could happen. They wanted it to happen. So when you can scapegoat someone as easily as Russia because of our history, like I said, I get skeptical because of how people try to force feed you with it. You know, it's when people deal in absolutes. Either you believe the intel community and you're a patriot, or you're a traitor and you support.
Right.
It. It's like, hold on, all I asked for was proof and evidence. Well, look at all these videos, and what about Paul Manafort? Like Paul Manafort, 2013 dealings with Ukrainians is not enough to convince me that Trump and Putin are working directly together. The indictments aren't even enough, which we'll get into a little bit in a second.
Yeah, please do.
I'm more so concerned about what similarities are you seeing with the war drums that we're seeing being beaten right now and the staunch defense of the intel community that we're seeing from the left, the same left that I'm sure you remember hated the intel community for good reason. So what do you think about that?
There's a guy that was just hauled out of the Helsinki conference. He was Sam. Senior moment. I can't remember his name. Sorry, Sam. Anyway, he was just put under. He was forcibly dragged out of the Helsinki meeting as a reporter, top flight reporter, on credentials from Nation magazine, for holding up a sign to ask a question. And where this comes in is he had been a Voices guest. The nice thing about Voices is we get an hour to just talk to newsmakers. So you got a feel for who is this guy. And when you see the news being generated from CNN, that, protester, they're trying to portray him as some kind of loony, disruptive. He's a reporter. And they really
just set up a sign. That was it.
Yeah, trying to ask a question, which is what us reporters, strangely enough, are supposed to be doing. So he did this show back when Trump was first elected with us. And again, I recommend, if you haven't followed him, he's worth it. Superb writer, reporter. And he was talking about Russia, all the way back right after Trump was elected, which is coming up on 2 years? And things haven't really changed, which is really strange. We're still waiting. He was pointing out that there's no evidence. There was no evidence there. And 2 years later, there is still no evidence. And you said, well, we'll get to the indictment in a second. Again, please. When the indictment came out at the press conference, he said in the press release that no evidence of any collusion with an American. I'm paraphrasing this. We'll try and get hopefully a link to it to get it right. And second, no effect on the election. So that was released in the press release. We should be reporting that. And instead, I'm seeing reputable sources, and I'm putting that in quotes right now, like The Intercept, who have just
which is
running.
Crazy. They took a dovetail like in the total opposite direction compared to what they used to be about.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent observation. I don't want to try and draw any conclusions. But the bottom line is it was wrong. And this guy is Jim Risen is who wrote this story. And do better, Jim. I mean, it's like he's an authority. How do you miss out on that one little, I think, kind of pertinent fact that those are the two facts that are said by Rosenstein when he did the release. So there's still no evidence. We've been 2 years later. The only intelligence evidence has been put out was that cockamamie report that blamed it on Occupy and Russian RT television. That was their proof of all. Read that report sometime. 17 pages of. There's nothing in there.
Oh,
Occupy didn't do it. Let me.
I remember when they were playing the blame game. I got so infuriated reading some of that stuff.
Well, they're still referring to that. They're acting like that's the intelligence that this is based on, and if
I want to touch on the proof thing, the burden of proof, right?
Yes,
If
please.
you're going to claim as a Justice Department or as an intelligence agency or as a politician or as a talking head that the president is colluding with another president well, first of all, it's really weird because whenever presidents work together to like foster peace and grow together economically, that's usually called diplomacy. But that's a different discussion. But anyway, that they work together to undermine the election, then the burden of proof is now on you as an intel agent or whatever. FBI.
I think the technical name for that is that's an affirmative assertion. So they're supposed to prove that.
So, the logic that has been presented oftentimes that I've seen from, talking heads, that's where people are getting it from. I've seen a lot of people literally use the exact same quotes. I'm like, are y'all just going to Twitter and quoting these people? And it's talking heads doing this that want to toe the line because they don't want to lose supporters. However, the logic flows like, oh, two things can exist at the same time. You know, Trump could be a Putin puppet, and we can also not like the FBI. Or Trump could have worked to undermine the election. And people are still speaking in this way that somehow lead you to believe that any conclusion that has been found by the FBI or the CIA or the DOJ at this point, or Mueller, has connected anybody to hacking elections, right? To undermining them or working together to undermine them, or at all linking anybody back to the Kremlin outside of these officers. And that would have been a little effective. But if you actually dove into the DOJ and compared the very basic facts being presented, and I like the quote that I read, it said it reads more like a spy novel than.
Strangely enough, that's probably an excellent observation for what's going on.
The only thing that they got right was they spelled Gucci for 2.0's name right. They tried to say these random companies in Russia, created this entity. However, their dates don't even match up. One. Secondly, Gucci for 2.0, according to forensics evidence, was based in the U.S.
It's a sloppy spy novel, by the way.
It's a sloppy spy novel, absolutely.
Yeah, really. If I was writing that as fiction, I'd be flat ashamed.
Stephen King and Tom Clancy would just be absolutely just disappointed.
Well, I think probably that's a way higher level of talent than what's being used to fabricate this fable.
Clearly.
And that's probably got something to do with why it's such a crappy story.
But why is it so why how can people say, like, do you understand people that, like, any lawyer who has, which they should have taken an LSAT, if they didn't, that's a whole different discussion. But anybody studied logic and reasoning, anybody's taken logic and reasoning courses knows, like, the biggest fallacy that you can make is reacting because, two things could be true.
In quantum physics, yes. In a quantum universe, yes. Exactly. But we're not talking about quantum physics. We're talking about
action and reaction and holding accountable based off of an action.
And truth. We're looking for objective, meaning object, something that you've got evidence to, and truth. Exactly. Now, are we ever going to get 100% hit? Probably not in my lifetime. But close enough is good enough for calculus.
Just because all things can be true, because two things can be true, it's a possibility of their existence, doesn't mean that they are, people.
No, and you don't want to bank on those odds if you're playing poker either. I mean, it's possible you're going to draw to that proverbial inside straight, but you're going to lose your shirt.
Because
please play poker with me too, by the way.
Exactly, lose your shirt. Exactly. There are real life implications in what you're trying to assert.
Yes.
If you are wrong, and we are putting Trump in a position where he could be impeached off of a faulty allegation because of sensationalist attacks, then you have basically armed the media and the intel community with the fucking skeleton key of all skeleton keys.
Let me throw something in when you get a chance here.
No, go ahead.
The name of the show that we did with Sam was Red Herring, which is a term for distraction, a diversion.
Yeah.
Look over here
example.
While I'm doing this over with the other hand in your pocket. Red herring.
There are more facts supporting, like I said, over and over and over again, there are more facts supporting the idea that Putin and Russia would benefit off of Hillary's campaign, more so than there are any facts supporting that he would somehow benefit off of the instability of Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump is an unstable, unpredictable human being.
The part of the problem here is somewhere up the line, I'd like to do a show with you where we unpack rhetoric. Liberal arts, which again is a term meaning worthy of free man. Liberal arts degree used to be, and this goes all the way back to the Middle Ages, and God knows how much further than that. But make a long story short, real long story short, you're breaking it into, there were two forms of education, one for free men, one for slaves. You don't want slaves even, obviously from American history, you don't want slaves even to be able to read. That was a death sentence. So you do not want a slave to be able to think for himself. You do want your leaders to be educated to think for themselves. So one of the 7 things that they learned, and then there's 3 things, and they vary on the numbers, how many angels on a pin thing. But one of them was rhetoric. And we've talked about this just a tiny bit, but I really wish we could spend time on the reason for teaching rhetoric was you knew when somebody was lying to you. You automatically knew all of these different, you just mentioned false, the rules of logic, the rules of false, ad hominem.
And ad hominem, and
yes, and I wish we could spend a whole hour sometime and just get people used to the concept of learn these things so you know it automatically. You don't have to think about it. You just know as soon as you hear it, well, that's an ad hominem, so they ain't got crap.
Exactly. And some people, and most of the world is conditioned to think like that. At least not to have an identity. Like, I know, not to be able to identify it. Like, there are people who deal in logic and reasoning so often. Maybe sometimes they're investigators, good attorneys, like that have to actually, like, that self-practice.
Reporters should. Throw that in there.
If you hear something wrong, there should be an immediate, like, okay, I don't know what's wrong, but that isn't right.
Yes, and trust your gut. That is part of it, too. Exactly. It's more than a science. It's also an art.
And so when you hear, oh, Trump could be guilty. Okay, it's like, okay, Trump could be guilty of treason, but based off of what? If we're going to even accept that on its face, that he even could be, based on what? Why are we even having this conversation? Because the reason for us even addressing the point of him committing treason is just as important of us as the accusation itself. So why? Because this is the question I present people. Why are we concerned with what Manafort did with Ukraine, with some oligarchs in 2013, 2014, with real estate, and we're not concerned that John Podesta, while influencing policy under Barack Obama, while managing Hillary Clinton's campaign, while about to be chief advisor for her presidency, had 50,000 shares in Juul, which is the biggest Kremlin-backed energy company in the country of Russia. In the country of that is their company, and he was on the board at one point while influencing policy under Barack Obama. We know about the Uranium One deal. We know about the FBI informant who said that they were so confident that they built infrastructure in America to carry out the Uranium One deal because they knew Hillary Clinton would get it pushed through because she appointed everybody to push the damn shit. So why are we not concerned about that? Why is that not a topic of discussion? Matter of fact, not only is it not a topic of discussion, but it's always being claimed to have been debunked. But it has not been. And yet this has absolutely been debunked. All of these articles have been retracted. There's not been one Uranium One article retracted. Everything that has been found out about John Podesta, for example, has never been retracted, never had to been corrected, but there's been infinite amount of articles and facts and statements about the Russia collusion. Nobody's ever been fired for bias against the Podestas or against Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton while they're investigating them. And yet we've seen that with James Comey, Andrew McCabe, and nobody, even though he wasn't fired, he left. The guy, the CEO of CrowdStrike, was in the FBI working directly with James Comey and Andrew McCabe. Robert Mueller was directly over James Comey before he appointed James Comey to take his spot. Like, when you analyze objectively, there's no way you can take this story on its face and be objective without immediately asking, well, shit, if this is the reason why this is important, or at least is being portrayed as important, if X is the reason why this is being portrayed important, so why isn't the X working in this formula on this side of the equation? And why and achieving the same results? And so that's what that's what I think is a big problem, is the just huge leaps in logics. And
red herring. What if it's on purpose? What if it is designed? What if it's designed to keep us from looking at what the real thing is? Another guest on the show was a great constitutional scholar, Yes, Trump should be impeached for war crimes. He broke the Nuremberg, which is the ultimate war crime. As long as we're looking at this red herring, we're wasting our time, because with a Republican-controlled House, they're not going to get him impeached on what they got.
They're going to want to. He wins an election. And I would say this before
I don't see anything even charges for him yet. Now, that's where these 2 years.
A monument charge is the only thing they'd be able to get him on.
And by the way, Sam did say that right as soon as Trump was coming in. Again, superb.
None of them would do it because they all make money off of each other. Like, they all do that quid pro quo behavior with international or even domestic lobbyists.
So diversion to keep us from looking at that thing, because for God's sake, we don't want to look at that.
If you're paying attention to Russia right now, I challenge you, because I haven't even done it yet. But just before we go, if you're watching this and you're paying attention to Russia right now, I challenge you to go look at what's up for vote this week. It's probably going to piss you off, because that's around the time things start happening, right? Republicans push a lot of things through. Democrats too, but Republicans are in office right now. But Republicans push a lot of things through while you're chasing the laser on the wall.
But it's fun to chase the laser on the wall.
It's fun, right?
Yes, it is.
It's popular culture. And what I mean by pop culture is there is a consumer-producer relationship where one person is financially benefiting from you massively consuming information.
Infotainment, not news, but it's entertainment.
Exactly.
Yes.
So with that being said, appreciate you coming back on, Terry.
Hey, great being here.
We're definitely going to have to do a part 2 of this.
Please.
For everybody else, appreciate you tuning in. Remember, more than anything else, always remember, find your balance. Peace.